Pasaka.
Madungog ba ito? Magamit na siya. Pwede ako siguro may magpapagod.
You are awake.
Dok, kung sa'yo mo boot, disuwat ka rin sa about. Sa about yung boot.
Foundation. Nanong po yung libro ko sila ng Manila.
Pero siguro natin siya.
Akong mama, alumni sa San Carlos na under siya nimo. Akong mama ko naman, 26 yung Jenny. Madonna. Amerikana ko.
Tapos spelling Kui. Terus Kui siya pinagit sa ilang bahay sa Edwin sa Don Pedro Kui. Interior dito.
So mo di gipanganan Don Pedro Cuesa kay narapod na diya ng
I don't know the relation with Don Pedro Kui ang
pag-name.
orang mga sides. Orang anak ka ng interior in the street. Side, ang Don Pedro Kui nga bahay diha ko sa doon sa kulong na dito na dapat sa magawa sa kulong.
Di ba luyo sa parian sa simbahan?
Murag na agad sa kanang Palian Plaza, kanang naa sa doon na sa Palian, barangay Hall.
Hindi yan, napita.
So, Palian Plaza, Palian Plaza, nainapos ni monumento ni artwork ni Castillo. So, mamalay ka ng fire department sa area by the
So kilid na simbahan.
simbahan simbahan nawa na ba?
1870s pa man ito nawa. I heard na napinabiling walls dito sa layo.
Karang structure na naman
Usap naman.
yan ang bahay ni Don Pedro.
At doon lang siya bahay sa mga Delmar. Di ba? Right across the street na siguro.
Familiar ba ka sa kanang tribo bitaw sa Bohol? Unsa na sila nga tribo?
Hindi yan ang sweet is born.
Yeah. I don't know whether she's
Mag-selfie ako sa sabihin ko dito.
They look very familiar.
On this side, yeah.
Eric, yeah.
Dito lang. They went to the US, yeah, of course it's
Ano yan?
When I was in college, I had a professor, his name is Father Leonard. I don't know if you know him, from the Ateneo de Manila. Father Leonard. That guy was one of the best history teachers I've ever had. Jesuit, and he's an American. So we had the privilege, my batch 84, graduated 84. We had the privilege of being under the old Jesuit
Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin at exactly 5 minutes.
foreigners.
So we will start at
Ito ni Father Horacio de la
Ano mo? Panagit. Sayang bitaw mo sa kayo. But we use his books all the time. Father Leonard was world history. And then may the name of I forgot him. Short guy. Philippine history.
Cabin set dito. Cabin
The thing is, I like the way he teaches system. It's not boring.
faculty there, great historians. Father Horacio de la Costa, Father John Schumacher.
German?
Mga Americans, ang San Carlos, German, Europeans. When I was doing undergraduate sa San Carlos,
May I request everyone to please rise for the Philippine National Anthem. You may now take your seats. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this momentous activity. Sergio Osmeña Sr.'s true father, the big reveal. So to welcome us this afternoon, may I call on Mrs. Annabel Annie Osmeña Aboites. Please give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon, dear family and friends. Welcome and thank you for being here with us today on a very special occasion, the big reveal of the paternity of my grandfather, Don Sergio Osmeña Sr. I am so excited to share with you the results of his DNA. Before we get started, I would like to express my appreciation to two special friends, Tad Jose Rosales and Gavin Sanson Pegalis. It was their efforts that all these came to light and this event made possible. I I would also like to acknowledge and welcome our newly discovered relatives, as well as our distinguished guests, Dr. Rasil B. Mojares, National Artist for Literature, Flavier D. Ordinario, Field Relations Manager of Family Search, Agripina D. Ordinario, a heritage supporter and history enthusiast. My correction is Agripina Londo, a heritage supporter and history enthusiast. Audrey Don Tomado, head of the National Museum, Central Visayas. Attorney Francis Michael Abad, Dean of College of Arts and Sciences of University of the Philippines, Cebu. So, welcome everyone. I will take this short so that my niece, Marilu Bernardo, can enlighten you briefly on the family history.
Thank you, Annie, for that warm welcome. Annabelle Osmeña Aboitis, nicknamed Annie, is now the matriarch of the Osmeña family. Since we are talking lineage today, let me say that she is the oldest living grandchild of President Sergio Osmeña Sr., being the daughter of President Sergio's fourth child, Emilio, nicknamed Lily. Now it's my turn to say good afternoon to all of you. Along with my aunt, I would like to welcome all of you to this event, which we have named the Big Reveal. Let me introduce myself to you. I am Maria Lourdes Bernardo, nicknamed Marilu. Unlike Annie, whom I do not call Tita, as I should. She is too young looking for me to call her that. I cannot use the name Osmeña in my legal name. You see, I trace my lineage to my great-grandfather, Lolo, through a line of females. My mother, Estefania, nicknamed Pipang, often called Senora Pipang, so as not to confuse her with her grandmother, Doña Pipang, nga as they say iyang gibangon. My mother, Pipang, was the first great-granddaughter of Lolo Sergio. Her mother, Vicenta, nicknamed Lenita, was the first child of Lolo Sergio. So I am the first great-grandchild of the first grandchild of the first child. All of us women with surnames that changed when we married. Thus, the loss of the surname Osmeña in my name. Regardless, I carry Lolo Sergio's genes, and I always endeavor to be worthy of his legacy. Allow me to narrate to all of you the background of how the paternity project came to be. I wish to emphasize that it has always been Annie who wanted to know who Lolo Sergio's true father was. It's not a secret that he was an illegitimate child, someone who during Spanish times was identified as a padre no conocido, father unknown. Someone who all his life used his mother's last name, Osmeña. Before Paloma Osmeña Charlie, Lolo Sergio's youngest daughter died in 2006. Annie wanted a DNA test to be done on her, since at that time she was the oldest living child, oldest surviving child. And then Annie wanted to compare her test with a living descendant of the man that we had always been told was Lolo Sergio's true father. We repeatedly broached this research project to the historian and writer par excellence, Gavin Sanson Bagares, but nothing came of it since not one of us knew much about DNA testing. Fast forward to 20 years later, this year 2023. Finally, this year, Gavin introduced us to someone who does know a lot about genealogy and DNA testing, Todd Rosales. Todd is a professional forensic genealogist. What a mouthful. Which means to a layman like me that he uses the study of lineage or descent from an ancestor to settle questions, whether legal or for public discussion about family history. He started researching about family history in 1994 and published his first research in the journal Family History, the Journal of the Institutes of Heraldic and Genealogical Studies in Canterbury, Kent, England. He has published books on genealogy and history, including a book on presidential genealogies and the genealogies of Jose Rizal and his girlfriends. It can be interesting, right? Okay. He has published articles on politics, history, and genealogy in the Freeman and Cebu Daily News. Currently, he writes a column, History Backers, for the Freeman. He is also a professional practitioner of genetic genealogy, which uses both traditional genealogical methods, such as written records and oral history without written documentation, and more scientifically, DNA technology. DNA testing has become an important tool to prove or disprove oral histories and family lore and legends. He has assisted families on probate and unknown heir cases, and even a foreign organization to establish the Jewish ethnicity or religious affiliation of foreign soldiers who died and are buried in the Philippines. He was just what we needed. So Anya and I, along with my sister, Dr. Maria Socorro Veloso Enriquez, nicknamed Joy, is out of the country at the moment, we commissioned him to use DNA testing to finally determine the true father of President Sergio Osmeña Sr. Gratefully, the DNA tests quickly and definitively revealed this. Additionally, we requested him to do research on who this newly discovered father was. What was this mystery man like? Physically, was he like Lolo Sergio? Erect, slim, with the upright stance of a leader, with a noble brow and the smiling chinito eyes? Was he like Lolo Cariñoso, as Annie fondly remembers him, since as a little girl, she lived with him in Malacanang and literally shared bread with him during their daily breakfasts? Was he like Lolo active in politics? Did Lolo Sergio inherit from him the elevated sense of honor that made Lolo be called the exemplar in Philippine history and politics? Who was this mystery man? So now I turn you over to Todd Rosales, who has the answers. He can better tell you what he did to determine President Sergio Osmeña's true father and what he has discovered about this mystery man.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malu, for that generous introduction and for giving the background for this particular endeavor. It's a very big task, no? Ms. Marilu said that the answers, and I hope I can give them to you and make everyone understand. I will be discussing the result of the DNA test towards the end of this presentation. This is a short presentation. Hopefully we can finish it within 30 minutes. Many people told me when this particular event was made public, what's the point of digging into President Osmeña's supposed father when they say that everybody already knows who his father was? But his paternity has always been a question, even though there are some who would say that it has already been proven based on circumstantial evidences who his father was. Many historians and history buffs would still say that there are still some lingering questions about who his true father was. But it's interesting when you Google with the terms Sergio Osmeña father, or who is the father of President Osmeña, or any combination thereof, this is what you'll get. Pedro Lee Simpson Gotiauco. Now this is just the first part of the Google results. But if you scroll down and if you search yourself in Google or any other search engines, you will get maybe 9 out of 10. For every 10 results, you will get 9 that would say that his father was Don Pedro Lee Gotiauco. Another interesting thing, if for the Apple users with an iPhone, you can ask Siri. I tried doing that just for a little fun. I asked Siri,
Pedro sings it not about them. It's Sergio Osmeña's father.
everyone heard that? Okay. Even Siri is confident to say Pedro Simpson Gotiauco is Sergio Osmeña's father. Siri doesn't even give you other options. Unlike Google with a lot of search results, Siri is confident it's only one person and it's Pedro Simpson Gotiauco. So we will find out today if it was indeed Pedro Simpson Gotiauco. And lastly, even the reliable and very popular online family tree, it's a worldwide, it's a connection of all family trees in the world if you're not familiar with Genealogy.com. And this is the master list, which means this is curated, this is kept clean by genealogists and online enthusiasts of genealogy. You can read that his immediate family, he is listed as the son of Pedro Simpson Gotiauco and Juana Suico Osmeña. So technically, Wikipedia, Genealogy.com, and other reliable and reputable online sources would say and tell us that his father was Pedro Gotiauco. So that begs the question, so if we already know his father, what's the point? The point is, there is no definitive proof. All of these are claims, all of these are based on circumstantial evidences, and most importantly, from family lore. None of them, of course, will stand in court. So that's why, as Ms. Marilu said earlier, for a definitive answer to the question who Sergio Osmeña's father was, they commissioned a DNA test, which is the only way for us to prove the paternity of President Osmeña. So I will give a brief historical context. It's difficult to understand the result if we don't look at the two men and the stories behind them who were said to be the father of President Osmeña, one of them obviously. As we all know, President Osmeña was born on September 9, 1878 in Cebu to Juana Osmeña. And at the time of his birth, the Osmeña family was considered as one of the most prominent families in Cebu. Not just the city, but in the entire province of Cebu. Many of the men held positions in Parian, and many of the family members owned vast land holdings all over the province of Cebu. They were businessmen, they were merchants, and they were married to most of the prominent families, also the elite of Parian and the rest of the province. As Ms. Malu also mentioned, he was an illegitimate child, born outside of wedlock. So he was a padre no conocido. The father was unknown. And again, as we all know, he became one of our presidents, succeeding President Manuel Quezon, and he later became known as Cebu's grand old man. So that's a brief background of President Osmeña. Of course, we know a lot of things about him already. His birth, his conception, his birth was always shrouded in mystery. There are a lot of stories, story about how Juana Osmeña supposedly really got pregnant, but that's for another time for us to discuss. There was also a story about how the mother of Juana Osmeña supposedly tried to abort the child because of the scandal that she caused by bearing a child outside of wedlock. So there are a lot of these rumors, family tales, and even tales from other families, not just the Osmeñas, that the story became even more muddled, and many people, did not know what to believe. But there are also many historians who say that many of these stories were probably created by the political rivals of Sergio Osmeña, because he was really a very popular and prominent Cebuano politician, and a lot of Cebuano politicians, including Vicente Soto, hated him. And all of these stories were probably also made up because they wanted to destroy his political career. So it is interesting that among our 17 presidents, only Sergio Osmeña was illegitimate. So today we will legitimize Sergio Osmeña. So our 17 presidents, from Emilio Aguinaldo up to President Marcos Jr., will now have official known fathers. Throughout his life, it is very interesting that Sergio Osmeña was very secretive about his family. His parents. In fact, I'll cite two examples that in 1931, there was a collection of biographies of prominent Filipinos. His father or mother, everyone knew his mother's name, but unfortunately, even his mother's name was not mentioned in that particular biographical sketch. Perhaps it was his request, don't mention anything about my parents. Another one, in 1944, a US magazine, Collier's magazine, did an article on Sergio Osmeña. He was the president of the Commonwealth at that time, but according to the article, even today, in 1944, he refuses to discuss his father or mother or his early home life. So even these two examples tell us that Osmeña was very reluctant to discuss his parents. So perhaps, of course, he knew probably the circumstance, or he knew already the identity at that time, but definitely throughout his life, he was very mysterious about his father. And even his mother was in the background. Most historians say that it is unfortunate that Juan Osmeña, whose son was one of the most powerful men in the Philippines during his time, was unable to take pride publicly that her son was Sergio Osmeña. So again, you can see from the pattern that Sergio Osmeña probably did not want any further controversy, so that's why he kept silent about his father's identity. Despite that, despite the mystery, two names came out as the possible fathers of President Osmeña. Number one, the earlier of the two candidates was Don Antonio Sanson. Take note, this photo is an AI-generated photograph using a lot of photographs from the old Sanson. Thanks also, I'd like to acknowledge my cousin Gavin Sanson Bagares for the photographs that he collected from the family. So old photographs of the Sanson family, Sanson men, including photographs also of President Osmeña, were consolidated. A composite was made by artificial intelligence and an artist drew it to make it more lifelike. So there is no existing picture of Don Antonio Sanson. For everyone's information, this is just a composite done by artificial intelligence. Who was Antonio Sanson? Antonio Sanson was a member of the Sanson clan of Parian. Also one of the most prominent families of Parian, a level of the Osmeñas at that time. They were also merchants and they were also businessmen and landowners. And in fact, Don Antonio Sanson owned a vast tract of land in Bourbon, Cebu. He spent his time in Bourbon and in Parian, and his branch of the family was also said to have come from Surigao and then Mindanao. But his roots were really from Parian as well. Don Antonio Sanson was also a juez de paz of Bourbon, which means that he was not only wealthy and socially prominent, he also had education, because the position of juez de paz, later on during the American period, it became justice of the peace. You had to have a certain level of higher education in order to have that particular position during the Spanish period. So Antonio Sanson was said to have married 3 times, or perhaps he had 3 wives. But unfortunately, what is known is that he only had 1 child, a daughter. So, and for now, I have not been able to trace his descendants. So, hopefully we will be able to do that eventually. This is the earliest reference to Antonio Sanson being the father of Sergio Osmeña. This was an article written by Vicente Soto on January 14, 1934 in the Progress newspaper. This is not a very flattering article. In fact, Soto accused Osmeña here of a lot of wrongdoing, so that's not the point of this article. What we're interested in is at the last part of this article. Let's highlight it. If you can read the 3rd part, Don Sergio, whom the latter called Tio, even if not a brother of his father, Antonio Samson. That's a misspelling, it should be Sanson, but Samson and Sanson are easily interchanged. Byongkong, his nickname was Byongkong. So that's the part, it's a very short mention, but it's a mention nonetheless. So this is the earliest reference we have found that supposedly Antonio Sanson was the father of Sergio Osmeña. In another article, unfortunately I don't have the actual article, but this was in a monograph series in 1961. There's a portion in that article that says the most convincing evidence to date that suggests Osmeña's father was a prominent wealthy man from the city of Cebu who owned extensive land holdings in the northeastern municipality of Bourbon named Antonio Sanson. Since Sanson was already a married man, it was not possible for him to establish a legitimate bond with Osmeña's mother. Nevertheless, Osmeña eventually acquired much of Sanson's properties in Bourbon, which I believe some of them still remain in the Osmeña family. So amazing, the family has been able to hold on to the property of one of the supposed fathers of President Sergio Osmeña. And one of the most vocal supporter of Antonio Sanson as the father of President Osmeña is the American historian Michael Cullinane. Citing from John Seidel's book from 1995, Cullinane, in published writings and personal communications with Seidel, expressed doubt about the veracity of the claims that Pedro Gotiauco was Don Sergio's father, noting evidence that suggests that the real father of Sergio Osmeña Sr. was another Chinese merchant, and that the putative kinship ties between the Osmeñas and Gotiaucos were convenient basis for a long-lasting business cum political alliance between the families. So, Michael Cullinane, the American author and writer, has always been a supporter of the Antonio Sanson being the father of Sergio Osmeña side. I'd just like to show one last, there are a lot of references that we can find, but I just wanted to show you the highlights. One of the latest, this is a 2022 book by Michael Cullinane, The Chinese Mestizos of Cebu City, 1750 to 1900. If you can see at the very bottom of the family tree of the Osmeñas that can be found at the last part of the book, Juana Osmeña is Suico, not married to, but meaning there was a relationship with Antonio Sanson, and their son was Sergio Osmeña y Suico. So this one is a definitive, like before it was just suppositions, but in 2022, last year, with the publication of Chinese Mestizos, Michael Cullinane definitively puts on paper that Antonio Sanson was the father of Sergio Osmeña. But there is a second candidate, as we already know, and supported not just by historians and writers, but also by Google, Wikipedia, Siri, and other online sources. Don Pedro Singson Gotiauco. He was a pure Chinese. Don Antonio Sanson was a mestizo Chinese. Don Pedro Gotiauco was a pure Chinese. He was directly from China who came to the Philippines with a rags to riches type of story. Now, I have not been able to find older references, but one of this is the oldest that I can find, from 1992, from the Forbes Zibenja, a Chinese version of the Forbes magazine. Gotiauco's second wife, a Filipina, meaning Juana Osmeña, but her name is not mentioned, is said to be the mother of one of the country's most honored senior politicians, Sergio Osmeña. While there are on hand expressed doubts regarding the authenticity of Osmeña's biological relations to Gotiauco, there is on hand no evidence available to prove the contrary. So the 10th volume, this is very interesting. According to the article, the 10th volume of a collection of Xinjiang historical documents published by the Fujian Political Association indicates that Sergio Osmeña's Chinese last name is given as Go Sibin. Sergio Osmeña appears in the documents in Fujian as a son of Pedro Gotiauco. So they also have their own definitive putting down on paper that Osmeña was the son of Gotiauco. But what is even more interesting for those who understand Chinese or a little of Chinese, his second name, the Si, Go Si Bin. Si is 4, or number 4 in Chinese. What is interesting is that Gotiauco already had 3 sons before supposedly Osmeña, which tells us that the given name, supposed Chinese given name of Osmeña, acknowledged him as the 4th son of Pedro Gotiauco. So it's kind of very telling also that the Chinese side in Fujian were already very confident that he is a part of her family. He is part of their family tree, and already given the acknowledgement that he was the 4th son of Pedro Gotiauco. A book by a national artist for literature, Dr. Rizel Mojares, The Book of Go, is a definitive book about the history of the family of Don Pedro Gotiauco. So it's a very amazing book. So if you can get a copy or read it, try to. I'm quoting some of the interviews and references that Dr. Rizel Mojares did. In his book, one of the proofs that the Gotiauco family has also, or the supporters of the Don Pedro Gotiauco as the father of Osmeña, have always believed was that Pedro Gotiauco and Juana Osmeña knew each other since they lived in the same block in Parian. Now, according to Dr. Mojares, he believes that although it's most likely true that Pedro Gotiauco and Juana Osmeña were friends and knew each other, this happened already after the birth of Sergio Osmeña. And the fact that by 1878, Pedro Gotiauco was not yet the prominent and wealthy businessman that he was later on, it is also very unlikely that he would have been close to Osmeña, to Juana, whose family was very, very rich and perhaps little snobbish with people who were not of their level, obviously, because that's how it worked. You went around with your own circle at that time. So it would have been impossible that Pedro Gotiauco would have been close to Osmeña, to Juana Osmeña, before the birth of her son, Sergio. Another quote from the book, stories are told that Juana used to buy oil and matches from the store of Don Pedro, and Pedro Gotiauco patronized the bakery and gaming parlor, meaning sugalan, which Juana's mother, Paula Suico, operated out of their home. Antonio Sanson, by the way, was also a frequent visitor to the gaming parlor of the Osmeñas. So they probably met there. It would have been weird, no? But the three of them met also each other. Juan Osmeña, Pedro Gotiauco, and Antonio Sanson met at the gaming parlor of the Osmeñas. Two other quotes, Pedro and Juana were supposedly often seen going out on paseos or a walkabout around the town. And it is further told that Gotiauco helped pay for Sergio Osmeña's education at Seminario Colegio de San Carlos and the University of Santo Tomas. Now, this particular story has also been often repeated in various newspaper articles, magazine articles, and in fact, in the book of John Gokongwei, in his biography, he said, or autobiography, he mentioned that they have a copy still of receipts showing that Pedro Gotiauco and the Gotiauco family helped President Sergio Osmeña in his early education. So all these things were also taken into consideration by some historians and perhaps by some members of the Gotiauco family as definitive proof that Don Pedro Gotiauco would not have helped just anyone who was not his own blood. So that's why he supported Don Sergio in his education. So those are the things that are put together by some people to prove that Don Pedro Gotiauco was definitely the father of Sergio Osmeña. In his last years, it is said that Don Sergio wanted to tell his family who his father was. There are several people today who have heard it secondhand and some third-hand from people who knew the story that Don Sergio wanted, before he died, to tell his children and grandchildren who his father was. Unfortunately, his wife, at that time, second wife, Doña Esperanza Limhak Osmeña, decided that it was not the right time to tell people about it. Why? When he was dying, we don't know, but probably she didn't want to rock the boat. She didn't want members of the other families to be insulted or perhaps offended if the truth of her husband's father came out. We don't know. They're all unfortunately gone. So, unfortunately, all people who knew Sergio Osmeña's father's identity are now gone. Hence, the DNA test that we did on the Osmeña, the Gotiauco, and Sanson families. As you may have heard or read on newspapers and magazines, DNA testing has become more useful and commercialized recently. It is now more affordable. It is now, and the results are more reliable and accurate, unlike before. And as we know, many DNA testing has helped solve centuries-old mysteries. One of them, an example, was a discovery of a body in England in 2012, which historians believed was the body of King Richard III, because his body was never known or located before. Using DNA testing, or through the use of genetic genealogy, they used the DNA of distant relatives of King Richard III through his illegitimate children, tracing it down to 2 cousins who were able to donate their DNA, which matched the DNA of the body found, which proved them based on historical documents. So there's a historical aspect to it, and based on the DNA match, that was the body of Richard III. And I think most of us are familiar with the case of the Romanovs of Russia. The second picture are the bones of the Romanov family in Russia. It was through mitochondrial DNA matching of the bones through the mother, the Tsarina Alexandra Fedorovna, which matched the mitochondrial DNA of Prince Philip of the United Kingdom, husband of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Definitively proved that the female body with the bones of the children were the cousins of Prince Philip through mitochondrial DNA testing, proving that this was the body of the executed and massacred imperial family of Russia. So DNA testing has become really very exciting recently. It's not just about who the father of this particular child is for paternity cases, but it has helped solve centuries-old cases. So what we did for the Osmeña DNA test, number one, we used the Y DNA or Y chromosome testing. It is important for you to understand that this test could only involve men. I know it's a little sexist, but unfortunately DNA is also sexist. DNA says one is a man, one is a woman. So that's why we use DNA testing. And the reason for that is we want to prove the direct connection of Sergio Osmeña to a father, which means it is a son to a father, meaning a male to a male. And the only way for us to be able to do that, obviously we cannot test Sergio and Pedro Gutiao, and so on, is test their descendants. So we tested 3 men who are sons of men, who are sons also of men. Because we are testing the Y DNA, and women, unfortunately, do not have Y chromosomes. So that's why only men were used for the DNA testing. And we utilize ECDNA. This is not an advertisement for this company, but we use ECDNA, number one, because it is very easy to use. They have an office in the Philippines, and the best part of their service is we didn't have to mail the DNA sample back to the US, but they did it themselves with their affiliated laboratory here in Cebu. So they have labs, affiliated labs in Cebu, in Manila, and other major cities in the Philippines. So that's why they're quite easy to use and reliable. And best of all, they're also the go-to DNA test of Senator Raffy Tulfo for his Raffy Tulfo in action whenever he wants to prove DNA paternity cases in his show. So at least it has the what do you call this? The endorsement of Senator Raffy Tulfo. So again, Y-DNA testing is only individuals with a Y chromosome, meaning males, can have this type of testing. Because the Y chromosome is passed on in the same pattern as our family names, in many cases, Y chromosome testing is often used to investigate questions such as whether 2 families with the same surname are related, or at least descended from the same direct male line. It will never give you false results, because it will prove that this man was the father of this man, who's the son of this man, etc. If the Y DNA does not match, then it will automatically disprove paternity or kinship. So we had 3 men, as I said, for the DNA sample. For the Osmeña family, former Mayor Tom Osmeña was very kind to provide us with his sample. Being a direct male line grandson of Sergio Osmeña Sr. His father was Sergio Jr. and of course his grandfather was President Sergio Osmeña Sr. So it's a direct male line. There's a continuous passing on of the Y DNA. For the Gotiauco line, he asked that his name does not appear in the report, so we call him Pedro Go, being the grandson of Pedro Gotiauco. He's also a direct male line grandson of Don Pedro Gotiauco. His father was also a son of Don Pedro Gotiauco. For the Sanson family, we have Ronnie Sanson. He's a direct male line grandson of Don Julian Sanson, a first cousin of Don Antonio Sanson. Remember earlier I said we don't know his descendants today, so that's why unfortunately we had to utilize the DNA sample of a descendant of his first cousin, which still is a direct male line, which means that first cousin of Don Antonio Sanson, the father of Don Julian, was a brother of the father of Don Antonio Sanson. So it's still safe. The sample is still sufficient to prove or disprove kinship. So if this were the case, let's take a look at the first chart. The connection between Gotiauco and Osmeña, this would be the case. The broken line means that's just alleged paternity because we have not yet proven based on the result. So this would be how the family tree would have looked like if chart 1 shows the Gotiauco-Osmeña paternity connection. Chart 2 shows the Sanson-Osmeña connection. So as you see, Antonio Sanson and Julian Sanson are first cousins. The father of Antonio Sanson was Jose Maria Tito de Sanson, and the father of Julian was Ambrosio de Sanson. So that's just an illustration that we had to do in order for us to see how it would be once the testing was done. So if you'd like to see, it was done through buccal swabbing, meaning they swab the cheek, I helped swab the cheeks, and the results were sent to the laboratory for processing. So finally, we go to the result. So this is the result of the YSTR comparison between the Osmeña DNA and the Gotiauco DNA. Please don't mind the male one as Severino Agaton because in sending the result to the US, we just placed aliases for the names of the samples. But male 1 is the Osmeña DNA, and male 2 is the Gotiauco DNA. As you can see, they do not match in the SCR, meaning this is part of the DNA that they compared if the two people are related. If you can see the numbers, they do not match in STR locus number 2, number 3, number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, 20, and the rest. So, as you can see, they do not match in many of the points of the DNA that they should match in. Just to give it a textual explanation, in comparing the 23 markers, which is the standard used today, of Tomas Osmeña and those of Pedro Go, the results indicate that they only match in 9 out of 23 markers, genetic markers, clearly indicating a non-genetic connection in the paternal line. Meaning, they do not come from Pedro Gotiauco both of them do not come from the same man, which was Pedro Botiauco, and excluding them from coming from the same male line. But the fact that they had 9 matches would tell us, actually, if you dig deeper into the genealogy, perhaps 200, 300, or even 500 years ago, they came from the same family already, because there are 9 matches. So there's still a relationship, but of course, in more recent years, meaning in the past 200, 300 years, there's no genetic match between the Botiauco and the Osmeña family. And the last one, comparison of the Osmeña and Sanson DNA. As you can see, STR locus 1 to 23 are all matches. There is 100% match in the DNA of the Osmeñas and the Sansons. You can see it. This is something that the labs have generated, and they are all a match. So to explain that, the comparison of the 23 markers of the Osmeña donor and those of the Sanson donor clearly indicates 100% match of all markers. Thus, genetically, Tomas Osmeña and Ronnie Sanson cannot be excluded from being of the same male lineage, meaning they are most likely from the same male lineage. In addition, all patrilineal related male relatives and unknown number of unrelated males who have the same YSR profile cannot be excluded. Tomas Osmeña is 99.982%, almost 100%. Actually, if you round it up, it's 100%, more likely to be patrilineally related, meaning related in the father's line, in the male line, to Ronnie Sanson. So in other words, the 100% match of the 23 markers indicates that they are closely related in the patriline and share a more recent common ancestor within 3 to 5 generations. So it's also very genealogically accurate that they share. If you remember the family tree, it was within 3 to 5 generations, even if the sample is from a first cousin of Don Antonio Sanson. Now, the DNA match does not give us the name of the father. That's very important to understand. But DNA results do not do that. But that's why I gave you the historical context. Who were the men suspected of being the father of Sergio Osmeña? Because without the historical context, it would have been difficult to accept that even if the Osmeña DNA matches the DNA of the Sansons, what if it was another Sanson man? No, si Paco Bilipot siguro. But based on historical context, based on what we know so far, there are only 2 men that Juan Osmeña was linked to: Antonio Sanson and Pedro Botiauco. And now, thanks to DNA testing, we now know, and I can confidently declare, that Don Antonio Sanson was the real father of President Sergio Osmeña Sr. Thank you very much. And now, I'd like to call on Dr. Resil B. Mujares, the National Artist for Literature, to give his insights on behalf of the academics, the historians, and writers of history. Sir, let's give him a round of applause.
Yeah, I was asked by Bud to say a few words this afternoon. And as he suggested, I'm speaking on behalf of academics and historians. I would like to congratulate Anya Huetis, Marilu, Todd, Gavin, and all those involved in putting together what has resulted in the event this afternoon, which has finally put to rest a mystery that has been there for, I suppose, 145 years, since Don Sergio was born. Of course, as historians, I mean, you're quite happy that kind of a gap in the historical record has finally been filled. The question that I've asked myself is why it has remained a mystery for so long, 145 years. And while DNA, of course, has put the whole question to rest, I mean, one wonders as to why this has remained unresolved for so long. And I suppose one thing that one can draw from this long-standing mystery is, I suppose, what it says about Don Sergio himself as a person. And I mean, my own sense is that kind of Don Sergio was, despite the fact that he's a very public figure, you know, no less than someone who had a long history of public service and reached the pinnacle of that field by serving as President of the Republic of the Philippines. Despite such a great public record, he was, I think, essentially a very private person. And I suppose this is if one reflects on his own personal history, one begins to kind of have a sympathetic understanding as to why he was like this, you know, quite private. He was not your hobnobbing, you know, backslapping politician. He was kind of very proper, very discreet, kind of completely devoted to what he had chosen to be his vocation. And yet kind of somewhat distant from things that kind of maybe it is purely personal. And so kind of he did not engage in kind of politics as entertainment, gimmickry, and so on. He was completely focused on the work of governance and public service. And I suppose that's one reason why kind of he probably felt for a long time the matter of, you know, questioning as to who his real father was, kind of is not really relevant to the core of the mission that he set for himself. And so he felt that kind of he was so completely focused on his work that kind of he probably felt that this is going to be a distraction. Kind of so. But I imagine, and this is a purely kind of based on my own understanding of the story. I heard that kind of in his final years, he really thought of like kind of making the big reveal and kind of breaking from say telling once and for all as to what his first personal story was. He had been kept this purely personal matter as secret at times, like his biography, for instance, the most extensive biography of Don Sergio Osmeña was a biography that I understand he commissioned himself, and this was Vicente Albano Fascis's two-volume biography, which kind of he sat for interviews because it was kind of, in fact, a commissioned biography. So it was kind of his an official record of his life story. But if you read the two volumes, the question of paternity is completely avoided. The book came out in 1971, and probably kind of, so in the 1960s, he was already putting his official record of his own life. And he decided he was not going to speak on this particular subject. And kind of, I was told I can't vouch for the veracity of the story that I heard. But kind of, in his last years, he felt the need to finally convey to the family kind of, his paternity. But this did not happen. This did not happen. It kind of probably it was not the right time until the time when there was no longer any time for him to do this. So in a way, I would like to say that what has happened this afternoon is in a way a fulfillment of what may have been his deepest wish in his final years. So in a sense, this has put the whole matter to rest, has come full circle, the story is complete, and so this is a great thing in what has happened this afternoon. So thank you to everyone involved in the initiative, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahalis. And now, we would like to ask a member of the Sanson family, the newly discovered relatives of the Osmeña family, Father Edwin Zamora Hinanuri, to give a response on behalf of the true father of President Sergio Osmeña Sr. A round of applause for Father Hinan, please.
Thank you. Mrs. Annabel Osmeña Boitis, Mrs. Maria Lourdes Enriquez Bernardo, the Osmeña family in attendance, Dr. Resil Ares, honored guests, good afternoon. For and on behalf of the Sanson family, I thank Mrs. Aboitis and Mrs. Bernardo for spearheading this grand endeavor to discover the true father of the late President and statesman, Don Sergio Osmeña. It is relatively recently that the American historian of the Philippines, Dr. Michael Cullinane, has categorically named Capitan Antonio Sanson as the father of Don Sergio. In his book, published by the University of San Carlos Publishing House in November last year, entitled The Chinese Mestizos of Cebu City, 1750 to 1900. And with the availability of the US-based DNA paternity test right here in Cebu, this historical fact has been firmly validated most scientifically. After 144 years to this day, there is no longer any reasonable doubt that the father of Cebu's beloved son, President Osmeña, was a Sanson. Therefore, I am thankful for our shared roots with the Osmeñas and our ancestor. I am thankful too to the science for giving mankind a great tool to answer an old mystery that has social, cultural, as well as historical implications. It is my honor to wholeheartedly welcome the Osmeñas to the Sanson home. To God, all be the glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. And actually that closes our event this afternoon. We have merienda on the other room. And for those who would like to ask questions about the big reveal, this is also the time for our open forum. But merienda is served, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your attention and for attending this activity. Yes, any questions, please raise your hand so we can provide you with the microphone.
To change our family name. Sanso naman.
But I'm related to the Simpsons
Sigmund.
on my mom's side.
Okay.
So if
Okay,
they took
so
my genes,
please
maybe one of
help
my
yourselves on the other
Hello,
room.
mother.
Merienda is served. And for those who just want to ask questions, I will put the microphone here in front so you can ask questions and we will answer your questions. Thank you.
Chapek's wife is first cousin of my mom, but he himself is also related to the billionaire.
The continuation between the Simpsons